distinguished speaker, Alexei Arestovich, who is one of advisors to President Zelensky, and he is well known also for joint daily blog debates with Mr. Mark Fagin. We have him already in connection. Mr. Arestovich, can you take the floor? Thank you.
Yes, I hear you well.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to address you. Thank you for this opportunity. And I would like to focus today on what all Putin's rhetoric is frankly anti-Western in nature of his speech. The latter, when they accepted, he signed fake decrees. The annexation of the LPR-DPR, the so-called Kherson Zaporizhzhia region to Russia, the famous speech he said the word West more than 20 times, Ukraine less than 10. That is, the central focus of his thoughts is understandable. This is a person who in life said very two important, who determined his policies. He said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the biggest catastrophe of the 20th century and his personal a major disaster. He connected these two things. That is, he has a personal motivation for the restoration. Proclaimed this the goal of his policy. Ukraine stood in his way because it did not subjugate itself to the former Soviet Union. Impossible to pursue further expansion to the West by threatening military force. He made military force is the main argument of its foreign policy. The main tool is even energy resources for it were in fact the second largest and most important factor in oil and gas trade, and so on. Diligently from his point of view, Europe and the collective West are very weak structures, the main mistake of which I repeat that his thought is that they preferred convenience to principles and values. And he does not believe in self-organization, he does not believe in management itself, he does not believe in the water of the people and the ability to express through democratic institution, he does not believe in the balance of power, he does not sincerely believe that people have a right to opinion and people have the right to debate different points of view, that this is what democracy is about, finding a very difficult compromise. Consensus as a result of public communication and cooperation of people. He despises the basis of Western civilization, which consists in the operation of communication, in my opinion, and his irony is all the more that he finished the most Western university itself in the western city of Russia, for a long time worked in Germany. Nevertheless, he sincerely believes that the best principle of management and internal affairs and external, this is something like a deep state where a small number of authoritative people are in quotation marks, must solve the main requests and challenges that they face according to the principle of a gangster gathering. His youth in St. Petersburg certainly affects after he ceased to be a KGB officer and took up music, commercial, criminal activity. He carries this through all 22 years of his reign, starting from the Second Chechen War that he staged. Thanks to the explosions on the Kashursky Highway, returned to the practice of physical destruction of their opponents on the territory of Russia and beyond its borders. The music creaked and so on, and certainly the projection of military force on those states that consider him not submissive. Look, over the past few years, he has not only started a war in Ukraine, he actively projected military force through a private military campaign in Africa. He directly interfered with the French interests of the Central African Republic. As a pan-European, he approached dangerously to the zone where uranium and other key resources are mined. Moreover, dictatorial regimes and, in a way, became a guarantor for non-democratic regimes by offering them the Syrian option. Appeal to them for military assistance and military economic assistance and guarantees of their security for the preservation of the regime here. This model that offers the world, and in this model its main opponent is the West. In this speech sounded anti-colonial rhetoric because he is trying to win over the sympathies of the countries of Africa and the countries of Asia. He is trying to appeal India to China to offer a definite alliance against the West by at least ideological then, and the main threat from my point of view comes from the Russian Federation, not even. In relation to Ukraine, Ukraine is a lever for him. At the same time, traitors who fled to the West and chose Western values for the West and a way and possible resources and a way to strengthen Russia because in Russia they perfectly remember and repeat the words that from Ukraine to Russia there is no empire without Ukraine, and in fact its intention is strategically in order to absorb Ukraine, become stronger and then bring down its trade in fear and influence through force on the Western world, first of all, the countries of Eastern Europe, the Baltic country of the Warsaw Pact, and I think today there are no more people left who did not understand two things: that when Putin says that he is going to war with the collective West and other representatives of the military political the leadership of the Russian Federation, they need and can be trusted. Why? Because they do exactly that. What do they say when he gave his famous speech in front of why it is often difficult for the West to understand Putin? Because that Putin is a Machiavellist in the worst sense of the word. For him there are only two main rules of balance. Interests, or rather, the balance of power and the pursuit of their interests in the most cynical way. For 22 years he not only deepened the citizens of Russia, he also corrupted them morally, because people who today approve the murder of Ukrainian children, and we see this at the level of not just leaders of public opinion, not just at the level of the ordinary population, is not just at the level of statements above political figures. A very simple fact: Russian mothers came to pick up the bodies of their fallen sons during the war, and the partisan fighters interfered with me. They allowed it to do in Ukraine now. About 10,000 bodies of Russians. Yes, there are soldiers and officers in refrigerators. We have repeatedly offered to Russian mothers and the Russian side just to pick them up without any preconditions. They refuse, and this refusal is not only a systemic nature of the state, but all did not cut out such a desire to pick up her son. Only one mom expressed in my memory, but she was not allowed out of Russia. Calls to the Ministry of Defense hotline, which was specially created for this. The ministry, about 400,000, that is, Putin has relied on radical immorality, he trades in fear, he wants us, he sincerely believes that morality does not mean anything, and, according to his deep conviction, the West and Europe, because she is also immoral, he thinks so that you and I have chosen convenience and a quiet life instead of values. Now that, after 6 months of war in Europe, the collective West and Ukraine have proved that we are what values for us more important than, and principles are more important than convenience, and even more important than the threat, and even more important than the fear of nuclear war. As we're proving it with you today, he doesn't have many options left. He crashed and our willingness to sacrifice yourself for the sake of our values with you, and will certainly want to raise the stakes now in order to prove speech goes exactly to the picture of the world. That is, my little experience in politics shows me that in the end, people rest against the boundaries of political accomplishments as the boundaries of political achievements and the boundary of a person's worldview. I try to write to you that we understood the system of motivation. He sincerely believes now, in my opinion, that yes, certain principles and values for undershowed, but these are rather principles and values that are not dictated by morality, dictated by their desire for geopolitical supremacy, reason about the geopolitical system, and, at the last threat. The threat of nuclear weapons. Of course, the West will not withstand Ukraine. Of course, we touch because there are, he considers and judges by himself, which would force him to face the direct inevitable and the terrible death of a large mass of people. He expects that we will falter because, I repeat, he judging by himself, and this method proved to be effective many times in Russia when a lot of opposition leaders were broken or killed or broken by fear, and he thinks that this is the last argument, an argument of despair, but he must should work here for details. This is here West Ukraine will negotiate here, they will refuse its value from its politicians, and if we falter with you it will be an extremely dangerous path, because then he Gets out of the red lines and gets a unique opportunity to realize everything that he was going for 22 years. Trade in fear and the realization of the main goal of their policy are very cynical and very practical in the worst sense of their words. Through the threat of fear we will give him the opportunity to be. With the right, we will give him the opportunity to assert his picture of the world. We will give him the humanity of all mankind through the fear of violence and the coercion of the perception of values for operation and cooperation. That is why, in my opinion, this categorically cannot be allowed, and there is one more thing here. When Putin, before the invasion, delivered his famous speech there was practically no justification for practically no arguments of a political military nature of an economic nature were heard. We heard historic arguments, the right to the inheritance of Kievan Rus, historical orthodoxy, other arguments that for the West, for the rational West, looks like something like a claim. France, Germany, about the throne of the legacy of Charlemagne, which is already about 1,000 years old and which is the property of history. He seriously thinks so, which is why it is often difficult for Western people to understand him, because from their point of view these are irrational things, and normal sober politicians focuses on the good of its people for the common good of the states of the region, for example, or the world, and proceeds from the military assessment of the military potential, of economic potential and other social potential and capital. He doesn't think so. As we see, he is ready to throw tens of thousands of people into the furnace. He is ready to break all the tricks and rule, waging war in order to achieve goals that he considers practically, which, in an amazing way, are, in an irrational word, that the same diagnosis that the US ambassador to the USSR made in the 41st year describes Soviet system, and which has not changed at all since then. It seems to me that I am already finishing. It seems to me that the task of preventing now is the choice, in my opinion, of the further path of development of the whole, or we will continue on the path to the operation of communication of the common good and the protection and development of our values. Joint, either we allow ourselves to be led down the road of fear of violence, humiliation and encouragement of cannibals who are capable put the world on the brink of disaster thanks to its complex system of painful motives. For this should by no means be allowed, and here it seems to me that we should make it clear to him that there is no and no. Only in theory, that we will not allow our values to be trampled on and the world to be launched along such a false path of development, are also ready to practically counteract this, starting with warnings from the military sanctions system. Readiness to respond, ending, as Mark said, with work inside Russia, using all its capabilities inside Russia, because contrary to the often primitive propaganda that Russian slaves or Russians are capable of resistance, I have never considered and do not consider the Russian peoples, the peoples of Russia, demonstrate the will, resistance and the courage and potential to transform the Russian Federation into a, and find you the courage to repent, to return it to the system of peoples of the world, systems of the world, division of labor, and again go to the common good. At least we think we should give them that chance. They need to make a clear distinction. The peoples of Russia and the Putin regime. The problem in the Putin regime relies on morality, cynicism and force, and it is he who should be our main goal in the information struggle of the political, diplomatic, military against him, and we must make it clear to him now. I'm already finishing that blackmail with nuclear weapon is unacceptable and will find its answer military, diplomatic, information, economic. Thank you very much, Mr. Aristovich.